Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is finally out. I guess it's been out for like 2 weeks at this point, but I've been busy and somebody actually passed away in my family. So anyway, before we get like way too depressing.
I like that hedgehog you got.
Thank you. I like this movie a lot. I should probably put her down. She was supposed to be a furry mascot, but it didn't work out. So I want to give you a very, very quick TLDR, no spoiler review for just a minute. I enjoyed this movie a lot. I thought it was great. There's a lot that it did right. There's a few things that bummed me out a little bit. One of them being, I think that the runtime should have been a bit longer, which I want to explain in spoilers. And there was one major element that I felt was toned down for kids, because obviously these are kind of like a gateway drug into the Sonic world for children and their parents. It's like, it really reminds me of classic all ages movies where you make it good enough that you are able to get those kids in. So you make it age appropriate enough for them. But you also make it a good film around that, like classic Disney, 2D Disney era, right? I liked it a lot. We're going to take a look at it today. But before we hop into it, I did have a question of the day for you, which is, what is your favorite Sonic the Hedgehog movie so far? Which one did you like most and why? And secondly, I wanted to say that you should grab your Sonic the Hedgehog Funko Pop, maybe even a jar if you're a little bit too big of a furry, and we're going to be hopping into it real quick. But if you don't watch till the end, I may just accidentally have to maybe send the Sonic 06 Curse of Mediocrity and Failure towards your family. The dark arts will be commencing if you don't enjoy the video, so just keep that in mind. Now, when discussing this movie, we're going to be going back and forth between some real-life footage, some movie footage and pictures, and also Sonic gameplay. I usually do this kind of thing for copyright purposes in general anyways, and also to spice things up, but when it comes to a movie like this that's still in theaters, it's also not like the whole movie in high quality is easy to find. I mean actual high quality, not some guy who smuggled in a camera. I got what I got. But Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is a movie that I really did love. That said, it's not a movie that I think is perfect. There are some things that did bum me out a little bit as a mega Sonic fan, but also some things that really had me smiling and grinning ear to ear, really excited, kind of jumping up and down in my seat like a little kid. Little background, I think I said it in the Knuckles show review, the show that apparently only I liked, nobody else liked it, so that might factor into what you think on my opinion. But I was the kind of, weird kid who would carry around an old Walkman, like an old Sony Walkman cassette player thingy, and I would listen to Sonic the Hedgehog themes that I had recorded from like Sonic X the show and different things like that. I was very, very hyper focused on Sonic as a kid. It's not something I've talked a lot about YouTube-wise because I don't have a big audience for that. YouTube does not push variety channels like mine when it comes to switching topics, but it is something I actually think I'd like to talk about some in the future. So Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is a movie that in a lot of ways, it combines ideas from multiple, I would say, continuities for Sonic, one of them being Sonic Adventure. Now, when I say continuities, I mean things like Sonic X, the Sonic the Hedgehog video games, in which most of those are canon to each other, but you can kind of jump in wherever you want for the most part. But a lot of the ideas from this come from Sonic Adventure 2, this movie itself. And as an introduction to Sonic, first off, like if you brought your kids to this, I think it does a really good job of actually getting you to know the characters, understand what's going on, and introduce you to them. The same way that I think 1 and 2 did. I think that every movie benefits from having seen the things before it in this entire continuity, but I don't think you necessarily need to be a Sonic mega nerd who played Sonic Adventure 2 to enjoy this movie. That said, I do think that that is where a lot of joy can come from, because there's so many different things, like the music Live and Learn from Sonic Adventure 2, all the way down to poses that they strike in the movie or scenes that are reminiscent of it. And I also think that the portrayal of Gerald Robotnik, which again, Sonic Adventure 2, and then later on shown in flashbacks and stuff in other games, I think that that was done very well by Jim Carrey. Now, this is a Sonic movie, but in many ways, it's not a movie focused entirely on Sonic. There's a lot going on outside of him in this film. I would argue more so than in any of the previous outings, or I guess I should say either of the 2 previous outings. And I thought that they did a good job with this. What I'm surprised about with this continuity, by the way, real briefly, is how good they've done with combining multiple continuities, like I said before, or the ideas of them into one. You know, with Sonic, there's a lot of different versions of the characters. A lot of times the idea is essentially that humans and these anthropomorphic animals that are intelligent as humans, and a lot of times even more, share a world. With Sonic X, the idea was that they came from sort of like a parallel Earth. In this, it's kind of a combination of these ideas where it's like they all end up on an Earth that they're not from, but they're also not all from the same planet. They're from various planets, which is something that's been explained throughout the series. I thought that those ideas are interesting because they were able to combine ideas from different continuities to make it work as almost a gateway drug to the Sonic the Hedgehog world, which is something they did very well in the previous movies as well. And the reason that I point that out with this is it would have been very easy to drop the ball on Shadow the Hedgehog and his origins if you move it too far away from where the source material was. They do a very, very good job with Shadow and with Gerald. They do a very good job of maintaining the heart and soul of who those characters were from Sonic Adventure 2, and also bringing Gerald to life in a way that hasn't really been done before for the most part. A lot of times when we've seen Gerald in video games, the guy was already dead. I mean, he was very old, and he basically got executed by gun, I believe, at a certain point. And some of the details on continuities for me are mixed up. Like recently, I've been rereading some of the Archie comics stuff, but you know, the video games go kind of a different direction from those. Regardless, my point is that when Jim Carrey was going to be Gerald, the question was kind of like, how are they going to do this? Because even in the trailers, we saw Gerald actually meeting Eggman. We didn't see like Eggman watching flashbacks in his brain, or watching a recording of Gerald from the past saved on the Ark or anything like that. It was just bringing Gerald to life. And this is a script that a lot of people joke brought Jim Carrey out of retirement. For Sonic 2, like after that, he had kind of said that he was a little tired of acting. Not like he hated it, but he needed a break, and he was, you know, kind of thinking about being retired. And now he says he's essentially in a soft retirement where he's only coming back for projects that he's really passionate about. What I will say is that you can see that, despite some of the silliness, goofiness, stuff like that, you can see that passion in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Like, you can see how passionate Jim Carrey was to come back and play two different characters that I think he brought very, very interesting life to, and that he humanized in a lot of ways. Like, in this version of the story, there are some things that I think are done even better than Sonic Adventure 2, or any of those games later on that build on the ideas of Adventure 2, you know, by expanding Shadow's story and things like that. There were some things that I thought were done better. They kept Shadow's origin simple enough while maintaining most of what it was, but they also were able to bring to life Gerald, like I said, who usually wasn't a character we were seeing in modern day. And I thought that that actually made him more sympathetic and interesting to see him. It does take a little bit of the mystery out of the character, but I also don't think that's what this continuity is really going for all the time, is a bunch of lore mystery that a bunch of video game nerds like me would really get into. It's kind of trying to balance that group with also the general audience. Because I think the group of just people like me who grew up hyper-focused on Sonic, we're not big enough to actually fund massive multi-million-dollar movies like this. That's just kind of the sad truth. Unless it's like a lower budget cartoon that is a one-to-one adaptation, I don't really ever expect that out of the continuity in general when it comes to these movies. That said, I thought that this movie actually escaped some of the issues that Sonic 1 and also Knuckles the show had, which was CGI. There wasn't much CGI in this movie that I noticed being bad or immersion breaking. When it came to like the Knuckles show especially, there were certain episodes and scenes where I was like, oh, this was a lower budget episode. Like, you can tell that Knuckles does not look as good here, and he looks fake and everything else looks real. And in Sonic 1, I think they were finding their footing on how to make it look real, because again, they had just gotten off of that huge redesign, if you remember, of Sonic, where he had kind of looked like a hideous, crazy monster when he was revealed. They spent millions of dollars redesigning him after people were like, what the hell is this? And then they turned him into something that actually is good. Now, for Sonic 1, because of that, I personally think it might have the weakest CGI out of the entire franchise, but it's like you were trying to fix something that was not good before that, and you ended up with a very good film. So I was very impressed by what it ended up being. With Sonic 2, I thought it was kind of the cream of the crop where the budget was clearly there and they did a very good job. But with Sonic 3, I thought the CGI was fantastic. That's something I worry about going into movies, especially when they mix styles. You know, think Who Framed Roger Rabbit. In Who Framed Roger Rabbit, it's supposed to look fake. You know, they're cartoons and they're very clearly cartoons. But in a movie like Sonic, you want the fantastical elements to also blend in to the world in a way where it doesn't take you out of it, where you're not immediately able to imagine, oh, James Marsden was just talking to a toy here and then they put a CGI thing over it. You don't want that in your audience's head when you make a film like this, and I thought they did a very good job avoiding the pitfalls of that. Now, despite loving this movie and loving the member berries parts of it, where they're kind of throwing stuff like Live and Learn out here, and they're throwing stuff like classic homages to scenes, even from Shadow the Hedgehog, the game, a game I grew up on, by the way. I still like that game, edgelord fest that it is. They were throwing in shots from things like that. They were throwing in callbacks to video game nerds that, if you weren't a game nerd, were still cool. They were still awesome moments. But if you were a game nerd or a comics nerd of Sonic like me, you'd be, you know, kind of like, oh, they're doing the thing, you know, like you're pointing. And I always think of the Leonardo DiCaprio meme from that clip from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where he points at the TV like, hey, this is my scene. That's always how I feel in my head when I see stuff like that. Now, that said, I think this movie could have also benefited from one thing that it didn't do, which was time. I think that with Sonic and Eggman, you can get away with the time that we had, and that's fine. You know, if this was Jim Carrey's last outing as the character, which who knows, it might be, it might not, would I have loved to see a little more of him? Yeah, absolutely. You know, if there was another 20 minutes, I would love if another 3 or 4 minutes was dedicated to his character. But I think really at least another 15 minutes needed to be dedicated to Shadow to fully flesh out the character. So in the intro, I mentioned runtime, and I also mentioned toning down for kids. That's kind of what we're going to take a look at here, because for me, I thought that the stuff around Maria could have been done a lot more in depth with more time, something that I think I already mentioned in this review. But also, I do believe that it was specifically toned back for child audiences. You know, I could go off on like a whole thing about kids are too soft these days, and we'd probably be on a 30-minute tangent. But something that bums me out nowadays is there were some things that kids probably shouldn't have been watching from the past. I agree. But something I've noticed now is it feels like everything is kind of censored. Everything is a little bit toned back, where they're like, oh, kids can't handle this. Kids get upset easily. And in the age of the internet, where like two people getting mad about nothing can find each other, I found that a lot of movies and things are a little more safe because of that. You know, you want to be a little more brand safe. You want to still maintain the heart of whatever you're doing, but you don't want to push it too far. And to me, it's odd that Sonic Adventure 2, and then even things like Shadow the Hedgehog, you know, years ago when I was a child, they were able to push these concepts of this same movie a lot farther in games that were rated E or E10 plus. So to me, that kind of says something when you have a movie that's covering such a dark theme and you have to scale it back way further from the game in order to still cover it. I feel like if you're gonna do that, you need more time to do so, but I really would have preferred that you actually went all in on that. I could probably do a full-on breakdown on that at some point if anyone would even care to watch it, I don't know. But with Shadow the Hedgehog, you look at this character from the outside and you think, this is just a black hedgehog with red highlights. He's kind of edgy. He's like dark, edgy Sonic. And, you know, oh, cool. Like, kids think he's cool. Big whoop. Like, this is not a deep character. But in a lot of ways, this character actually deals with themes of grief, themes of self-loathing and a lack of belonging in ways that I think can connect to people of any age range, especially if they've experienced loss or they feel like an outsider. In those ways, I feel that this movie did maintain Shadow at the core of what he was supposed to be. But I also was watching and feeling like if you had incorporated elements from the games, like for example the arc, instead of just having the arc essentially be the home of the Eclipse Cannon, where they launch it into space later on, and it's essentially just a mobile weapons platform to fire the Eclipse Cannon that Gerald is using. If you had not only had it be that, but also had it be the place where Shadow was kind of growing up and living with Maria, I think you could have done a bit more with the original themes of Shadow and of Maria that would have added to the grief aspect of this movie better. Because Maria didn't just not really have friends and not really know a lot of people at the time of her passing because she just lived on a military base with Gerald. In the source material, at least in a lot of different ones, and it's been expanded over the years, Maria was very, very ill, and Gerald was working on a cure for her illness, and she was kept on the Ark in space, essentially instead of a gun weapons facility on the ground on Earth. She was kept in space in order to keep her condition, I believe it was in remission, essentially so that she could still be alive while Gerald looked for a cure for her illness. Now, in this movie, a lot of those things are simplified, even down to her death, but I always thought that her death itself wasn't the point. You know, like, her death itself is not the thing necessarily that sets Shadow off completely. It's the fact that she was his only friend, which we do see here. It was also the way in which she went. She got shot in the back while Shadow was basically incapacitated and unable to do anything and kind of watched Maria dying. But also Maria had for years longed to go to Earth, and she had always talked to Shadow about it. She had talked about the people on Earth and how beautiful the planet was and how good it was and how he would be accepted there and have a place there and how they would be friends forever, you know, and they'd be able to be happy there and have a life together. And that got taken from her in orbit of Earth, right? By people from Earth in the games and in the source material. And in that way, I felt that this movie simplifying that by just having her kind of blow up, not actually getting shot by someone, and kind of getting RoboCop rebooted, where Murphy gets blown up in a car bomb instead of you actually seeing the gruesome thing that happens to him. I'm not saying that we needed to watch like a torture porn thing where Maria gets blown apart, but I did feel that, like, by moving that plot to Earth, by simplifying that plot a lot, and by toning down the violence on it, it absolutely works probably better for children, and it works better for a short runtime, but it doesn't work better as Shadow is such a complicated character. I think for me, that was my biggest detriment with the film, was how they toned that down. The only other thing I have about the movie that I didn't like is probably a minor nitpick, which is that I felt Kristen Ritter was kind of wasted in this film. She plays a military officer for Gunn, and she's not really a character that matters much. She's just a minor antagonist who eventually basically leaves the film and doesn't matter anymore. And it's kind of too bad because Kristen Ritter is an amazing actress. She's also gorgeous, by the way. But I always loved her in Jessica Jones. She's done a good job in many projects. It seemed to me like if you were going to cast her here, there would have been more for her to do. Again, if you had a little bit more runtime. In essence, she's kind of just a character here to explain a couple of the plot points around Gunn as an exposition vehicle, and that's it. And I kind of wish there was a little bit more out of that character or out of that actress. So I love Sonic. I love these characters very much. I've always, wanted to do videos and stuff with the property, kind of talk about it and get new people interested in it. It's something I'd love to play through some games on, and I actually have some planned over on my Let's Play channel. That's going to be in this description down below, along with our other channels. If you like kind of more anime-focused stuff, I have a channel like that with my wife, Jill, who you might have heard in the background at some point. Jill, say hi.
Hello.
And she does a great channel over there. We also have our own store, CosmoBunny.shop, where you can buy coasters, keychains, trays, and more from recycled, repurposed comic books, manga, magazines, etc. that we keep out of landfills, make something transformative and new, and release it to your home, like releasing an animal into the wild. So that's a great way to support the channel if you're interested. But I will say this, I loved this movie overall. Like, I can have a few gripes with it as being a mega fan of the source material, but I think it did what it was supposed to do. I talked to Jill, I talked to my mom, who even went with us. They both didn't have these problems because they obviously didn't play those games. Like, they didn't grow up with that. So for the general audience, I think this movie is basically perfect. Like, I don't really think there's much to criticize at all. For hardcore fans, there's going to be a thing here or there where you're like, huge member berry moment, love that. There's gonna be a thing here or there where you're like, I really wish they had included that, maybe taken a tiny bit more time. But overall, I thought it was really good. There is a rumored Shadow the Hedgehog spin-off, either movie or show, we don't know. And depending on what they do with that, I do think they could get into some of this other stuff. I mean, they probably wouldn't change Maria's death, but they could get into stuff like maybe the illness. Maybe that's why she's around Gerald all the time. But some other stuff like the space colony arc changes, the gun changes, things like that. It's just kind of what it is for the movie universe. Do I prefer the original a little more in that way? Yeah, I think that the original has a little bit more powerful themes with that stuff, but I love the way that they adapted this. And as a final thought, I love that they're not ashamed of the fact that they're a video game movie. You know, something I have really been frustrated about, especially growing up, was like with superhero movies, video game movies, all this stuff, it felt like they were ashamed of it. Like they didn't want people like me to be like, oh, The Thing, that's awesome. They wanted to use the IP to make money, and they were like, people like you are a nerd. This is not for you anymore. We're taking this for the jocks now. Like it felt like they were trying to make it too cool. I love that with Sonic, it just is full of heart and it's okay with what it is. And I wish more movies would be like that, and I really appreciate that. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I appreciate hearing from you too. Hope you have a fantastic day, and as always, everyone, stay swag. Gotta go fast.